The year is 1959. A doctor, a weekend racer, and a broke machinist from Sacramento walk into the same SCCA paddock at Riverside Raceway. They are driving three different cars, a Jaguar XK150, an Aston Martin DB2, and something nobody can identify. Nobody except the driver. It's a car built in a rented garage by one man, with no corporate backing, no factory tooling, no racing pedigree. The body is fiberglass. The chassis is hand-welded steel tube. The engine is a Chevrolet V8, pulled from a wrecked passenger car. That unidentified car finishes ahead of the Jaguar. The doctor goes home that night and orders one. What he ordered, and what almost no one remembers today, was a Kellison J5. This is the story of a car that beat Italian and British exotics on American soil, designed by a man who learned aerodynamics from jet fighters, built by people who learned fabrication from necessity, and forgotten by a history that only remembers the brands that survived. It shouldn't have worked. It absolutely did, and the reason it disappeared tells you everything about how the American automotive dream actually operates. Jim Kellison was born in 1932 in Seattle, Washington. He grew up fixated on speed, machinery, and the particular American post-war conviction that if you understood how something worked, you could build a better version of it yourself. He was not a trained automotive engineer. What he had was a mechanic's eye, a pilot's instinct for aerodynamics, and an almost pathological obsession with fiberglass composite materials he'd encountered while working as a civilian at Travis Air Force Base in Northern California. He opened a shop on Sutter Street in Folsom, California in 1958. His first design, the J4, was a coupe and roadster body sized to fit existing production car chassis. It was sold primarily by mail order, advertised in the back pages of car and hot rod magazines, and it generated immediate, intense interest. Not because Kellison was a marketing genius, because the car looked unlike anything else on American roads. The J4 established the template. The J5 perfected it. And the gap between those two sentences contains one of the most instructive stories in post-war American automotive history about crisis, iteration, partnership, betrayal, and the impossibility of surviving as an independent car builder in an economy that was rapidly rewarding scale over craft. In December 1959, Motor Trend magazine published a road test of the Kellison J4. It was the first major press the car had ever received, and Kellison had every reason to believe it would launch him into the American sports car mainstream. The review almost destroyed the company. Motor Trend's journalist opened with genuine praise. The car's proportions were formidable from any angle. The fit and finish exceeded expectations. The dashboard layout was clean and purposeful. The seat positioning gave the driver a sense of being inside the car rather than perched on top of it. Then came the track session. The Kellison J4, mounted on a borrowed 1956 Corvette chassis that had been heavily modified, displayed oversteer so severe that the driver could barely keep the car on the circuit. The conclusion was damning. The Kellison was a beautiful long-distance touring car too pretty to race. That phrase landed like a verdict. Here is what that review actually revealed. The problem was not the Kellison body. The problem was the chassis it was sitting on. The borrowed Corvette frame had already been heavily modified, its suspension geometry compromised, its alignment corrupted. Kellison had not supplied the chassis. He had supplied the body. But perception in automotive journalism is binary. The car failed the test, and within weeks, Kellison understood he had a reputation problem that required a structural solution, not a public relations solution. He hired Chuck Manning. That decision changed everything. Manning designed a new steel box tube frame for Kellison, then refined it into a tubular X-frame with independent front suspension geometry borrowed from Chevrolet production cars, which meant parts were available, affordable, and already proven at speed. By 1961, Kellisons mounted on the Manning chassis were winning SCCA races. The car that had been dismissed as too pretty to race was now finishing ahead of Jaguars, Aston Martins, and Ferraris. This is the turning point. The J4 revealed the flaw. The J5 inherited the fix. The timing of that reversal is critical because it coincided with the introduction of the car this video is about. The Kellison J5 debuted in 1960, and understanding what it requires, understanding what the J4 was not. The J4 was tight. Its 98-inch wheelbase and 39-inch roofline made the car a physical challenge for anyone over 5 feet 10 inches. The entry was awkward. The footwells were cramped. The ergonomics assumed a driver who was simultaneously enthusiastic about speed and indifferent to comfort. For a weekend racer who planned to spend 90 minutes in the car and then go home, that was acceptable. For anyone who wanted to use the car as a GT tourer, which is what the market was increasingly demanding, it was a liability. Kellison's engineering response to that liability was not cosmetic. He extended the wheelbase to 102 inches, a 4-inch gain. That sounds modest, but translates directly into usable door length, interior volume, and legroom. He raised the roofline by 1 inch, giving the car a headroom measurement that, while still intimate by modern standards, was now livable rather than merely tolerable. The overall profile remained unmistakably Kellison low, forward-thrusting, predatory, but the J5 had proportional maturity the J4 didn't quite achieve. The J5R was the racing variant, a stripped body shell with no inner structure, no sound deadening, no dashboard amenities, produced at minimum weight for buyers who intended to take it directly to the track. With the right engine and the Manning chassis, Kellison claimed 160 miles per hour was achievable. That was almost certainly aspirational for most builds. But a well-built J5 on a competent chassis with a big block Chevrolet was genuinely fast, not magazine cover claim fast, but honest, repeatable fast. The J5 was not sold as a cheaper alternative to European sports cars. It was sold as a superior one, built for American roads, American engines, and American racing classes. That positioning was audacious. It was also, on the evidence of SCCA results from 1961 to 1965, defensible. Between 1961 and roughly 1965, the Kellison J Series was a legitimate SCCA force. Not a dominant one, production volumes were too small, build quality too variable, and the cars were only as good as the individual who assembled them. But in the right hands, with the right chassis and drivetrain combination, a Kellison was competitive equipment. This is where the kit car model becomes both the car's greatest strength and its most fundamental vulnerability. A J5 could be built with whatever engine the buyer preferred. A small block 283 cubic inch Chevrolet made the car a nimble, high-revving sports racer. 348 cubic inch big block with triple carburetors turned it into something genuinely intimidating. 409, 327. Every combination produced a different car, which meant that no single Kellison was definitively representative of what a Kellison was. That variability generated enthusiasm. It also generated inconsistency. The vulnerability. The Kellison's racing reputation depended entirely on individual builders doing individual work correctly. When they did, the results were extraordinary. Kellison could not control what his customers built. He could only control what he sold them. What he sold was genuinely excellent. The fiberglass bodies were consistent, structurally sound, and dimensionally accurate. The Manning chassis, when buyers ordered it, was a well-engineered piece of work. But the gap between what Kellison shipped and what ultimately appeared on the race grid was as wide as the ambitions and skills of the people who filled it. By the mid-1960s, the landscape that had made the Kellison possible was already beginning to change. The American automotive industry was consolidating rapidly. Factory-backed racing programs were becoming more aggressive, more funded, and more technologically advanced. Chevrolet, Ford, and Chrysler were no longer treating motorsport as a side project. They were turning it into a battlefield of engineering departments and corporate budgets. For small independent builders like Kellison, this shift created a pressure that had nothing to do with design quality. It was purely economic gravity. Even a well-designed fiberglass sports body could not compete with factory warranty networks, dealer distribution, and mass production pricing. The Kellison was still fast. It was still competitive in the right hands, but it was increasingly operating in a space that was shrinking around it. At the same time, customer expectations were changing. In the early days, buyers accepted that a kit car was a project, something you assembled, adjusted, and improved over time. By the mid-1960s, that patience was disappearing. Customers wanted turnkey performance. They wanted consistency. They wanted a car that behaved the same way every time it was driven. That expectation did not align with the kit car model, because even with the Manning chassis, even with improved engineering, the Kellison still depended heavily on builder execution. Alignment, engine choice, suspension setup, and fabrication quality all varied from car to car. And that variability, which had once been part of the appeal, was now becoming a liability. Kellison himself began shifting focus away from pure sports car production. The company expanded into other fiberglass applications, including specialty bodies and commercial projects. The racing dominance of the early J-Series era started to fade. not because the design stopped working, but because the ecosystem around it stopped supporting it. By the late 1960s, the original momentum had slowed significantly. What remained was a reputation held together by stories rather than scale. Stories of J4s and J5s outperforming far more expensive European machinery. Stories of garage-built cars reaching speeds that embarrassed factory teams. Stories that circulated in magazines, in paddocks, and in private conversations among racers. But stories are not a business model, and without scale, without factory backing, and without a stable production pipeline, Kellison could not survive in the same form it had briefly occupied during its peak years. Jim Kellison eventually stepped away from the spotlight of performance car building. His name did not disappear completely, but it no longer carried the same presence in contemporary racing culture. The company's influence persisted indirectly, through builders, restorers, and enthusiasts who kept the cars alive long after production ended. Today, surviving Kellison cars are rare. Many exist in heavily modified form, often rebuilt multiple times across decades of ownership. Each one tells a slightly different version of the same story. A fiberglass body designed with ambition, mounted on whatever engineering the builder could afford or understand at the time. And that is ultimately what defines the Kellison legacy. Not factory perfection, not mass production success, but a brief moment in automotive history where one man's design could still enter the same space as the world's most expensive sports cars, and occasionally leave them behind. It was not sustainable, but for a short window of time, it was real. And in automotive history, that is often enough to become unforgettable. I'm grateful you spent time watching this story about the Kellison. There are more stories like this one: cars and builders and decisions that altered the shape of automotive history without making the headline coverage. If that's the kind of history you want to explore, please subscribe. We go deep, always.